My cheating rich wife painted me as the villain and took our daughter. Years later she found me and we took the monster mom to court. It all began many years ago when I married Laura, the mother of my daughter Emily. Laura and I were high school sweethearts. And at first our bond appeared impenetrable. We were young, full of dreams and eager to face the world together. But life has a way of tearing apart. Laura came from a wealthy family, accustomed to a life of luxury, whilst I grew up in a more modest home. Despite our disagreements, I loved her profoundly, and did my best to provide for her, in the way she was accustomed to. But no matter how hard I tried, it wasn't enough. The stress of attempting to meet Laura's expectations weighed heavily on me, and our marriage began to falter. Our relationship deteriorated, and we argued more frequently. I observed Laura appeared detached, as if her mind was elsewhere. I attempted to reach out to figure out what was wrong, but she continually dismissed me, stating that everything was okay. Only later, during the divorce proceedings, did I uncover the tragic reality. Laura had been unfaithful to me several times during our marriage. The revelation struck me like a ton of bricks. All those evenings I worked late to support our family. All the sacrifices I made to keep our marriage afloat. And she had been betraying me the entire time. Despite the grief and betrayal, my first priority was Emily, our daughter. She was just 11 years old at the time, and I wanted to do everything I could to be there for her. But that hope was dashed during the divorce settlement. Laura was determined to portray me as the villain in our story. She accused me of being emotionally distant and inattentive, and even hinted at possible abuse, all of which were false. But Laura was convincing, and she was able to turn my entire family against me, including my parents and siblings. They all believed her narrative and assumed that I had done something dreadful to push her to adultery. It seemed like I was stranded on an island, with no one willing to listen to me. The courtroom battle was ugly, and despite my best efforts the judge sided with Laura. She was given full custody of Emily, while I was granted limited visitation rights. Laura destroyed even those few opportunities to visit my baby. She frequently forgot about scheduled visits, claiming Emily was unwell or had other commitments. I would volunteer to drive Emily to school or assist her with assignments, but Laura refused to let me play any significant role in her life. My family, who had always been close to Emily, supported Laura and helped her keep my daughter away from me. They were determined to remove me from Emily's life, and I was powerless to stop them. The years that followed were among the most agonizing of my life. It began subtly. At first Emily would be hesitant to visit me, preferring to stay with her mother, even though it stung. I attempted to understand. After all, children frequently prefer one parent over the other. Correct. However, it soon became evident that something more sinister was at work. Emily would come to our appointments with a laundry list of complaints, things I allegedly did, or said that depicted me as the evil guy. I was perplexed since none of it was accurate. When I tried to talk to Laura about it, she dismissed my concerns or twisted the conversation to make it appear as if I was crazy or exaggerating. I tried for years to establish a relationship with Emily, but it got increasingly impossible. Phone calls remained unanswered, letters were returned unopened, and my attempts to visit her were met with animosity from Laura and my family. They all seemed intent on erasing me from Emily's life. The worst thing happened when Emily was around 13. She said bluntly that she didn't want to see me anymore. She spoke it with coldness as if I meant nothing to her. I was devastated. I knew Laura had been telling Emily lies, but I didn't have the heart to drag her through a messy court battle. After all, she wanted to stay with her mother, and separating her from her mother would only exacerbate the situation. I didn't want to be the source of further trouble in her life, so I reluctantly decided to pull back. It was one of the most difficult decisions I'd ever made. I hoped that one day she'd grasp the truth and return to me, but that didn't happen for a long time. Years later I gradually, but steadily, moved past that horrific moment in my life. I met Megan, and there was an instant connection between us. Because of my previous experiences, we took our time getting to know each other. Before getting married, Megan had 2 children of her own, so the majority of my time was spent with them, and we established a life together. While I adored my new family, there was always a part of me that wondered about Emily. How was she doing? What had she become? I contacted Laura several times over the years to inquire about Emily, but she never replied. I tried to convince myself that Emily was better off without me, but I couldn't get rid of the sense that I had abandoned her. Then unexpectedly Emily contacted me. She was 20 years old now, and her message was brief and straightforward. She wanted to meet and chat. She stated she needed to know more about our family, including why I wasn't there for her. My heart skipped a beat as I read her message. The prospect of seeing her after all this time made me nervous. But I was not going to pass up the opportunity to see my kid. I was scared but excited. Perhaps this was the moment I had been waiting for all these years. We planned to meet in a quiet cafe. I was nervous as I waited for her to arrive. When she eventually walked in, I barely recognized her. She had matured into a beautiful young woman. But the wrath and sadness in her eyes were undeniable. She had clearly been carrying a lot of anguish for quite some time. We sat across from each other, and the tension was evident. Emily didn't spend time getting to the subject. She needed answers. Answers I knew would be difficult to hear. I took a big breath and started telling her the truth. I did not hold back. I told her everything. How her mother and family had deliberately poisoned her against me. How they had twisted every scenario to make me look terrible, and how I had worked so hard to be a part of her life despite everything. I told her about Laura's infidelity and the lies she told during the divorce. I spent the next 3 hours laying out the facts of what had happened. I had brought up previous court records, text messages and emails that corroborated my story. I wanted Emily to know that I understood what she had been taught about me over the years, and that I wasn't the monster she had been led to believe. Emily sat startled as I explained what had transpired. She grew up believing that I was the one who had abandoned her, that I didn't care enough to be a part of her life. She found it overwhelming to learn the truth. I could see she was absorbing everything, so I didn't press her to react. I knew that was a lot for her to take in. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. She questioned me why I never fought back, why I didn't do more to stay in her life. That question crushed me. I had to explain that I did not want to place her in the center of a court dispute, and that I believe standing back was the best way to protect her. I wanted her to have a good upbringing, even if it meant she despised me for a while. But the truth was that I regretted not battling harder. I regretted allowing Laura and her family to control the story. Emily appeared to be gaining a better understanding of what had happened. She was outraged partly at me but largely at her mother. She couldn't believe Laura had gone to such efforts to make herself look like the better parent. Emily realized she had to take action. She stated that she wanted to confront her mother and lay everything out for everyone. I was astonished, but also proud of her for advocating for herself. Emily wasn't the young kid I knew a decade ago. She was a strong lady capable of self-defense. At the same time, I was concerned about the impact this would have on her. I breathed a sigh of relief when she said she wasn't sure how to go with our connection, because she'd grown accustomed to having an absent father, but she'd love to meet and talk more. Laura bombarded me with angry phone calls and text messages. 2 days later, Emily apparently challenged her with the information I shared. Laura was outraged, accusing me of turning Emily against her and ruining their friendship. I didn't expect Emily's next action. She called me yesterday to say she's going to take Laura to court for parental alienation. She intends to sue for the emotional harm caused by years of lies and manipulation. Laura still calls me constantly now. She is between demanding that I talk Emily out of the lawsuit and threatening. My family is also getting in touch, suddenly wanting to straighten things out and reconnect. I'm at a loss. One could say that Emily's at last knowing the truth relieves some guilt. Conversely, I never meant for things to get this far. Along with Emily, I also have Megan and her children to look for. At this point in my life, I'm not sure whether I could manage the same mental strain once more. While Laura and my family should pay for their acts, I don't want to bring further suffering or trouble. I have been essentially torn. Emily deserves praise for searching the truth and for trying to speak out against the mistreatment she has suffered. But I also worry for her. The legal system is harsh, particularly in cases involving families, and I wanted her to suffer less than she already had. From a distance, I attempted to assist her, so she could make her own decisions, and let her know I was always available for her, should she need me. The emotional strain Laura and my family are causing is not even something I can articulate. All of this makes me wonder if, despite this complex scenario, I did the right thing by telling my daughter the truth about her mother. In our past, your advice and views would be much valued. Update 1. Things have turned bad. Any confrontation with Laura would not be simple, since she shows no respect for anyone around her. Emily came to our house after her argument with her mother. Her eyes were red from crying. She unleashed, this time without restraint. She laid everything out. Every agonizing aspect of her life for the past 8 years. Laura might have gained custody, but it was abundantly evident that she had no concept what it meant to be a mother, let alone look after a child. Emily related how Laura wasn't even home half of the time. She would be away occasionally for days on end, leaving Emily to care for herself. Laura was intoxicated and erratic half of the time. When she was home, Emily talked of evenings when Laura would come home in a fury, throwing things, screaming, and occasionally even blaming Emily for her own mistakes and discontent. As she related these events, the loneliness, the anxiety she must have experienced, my heart broke. Still to come though was the worst. Emily related to us too. Occurrences that still tormented her. She was 13 years old at first. Laura had departed without food or money, alone for the weekend. Emily burned her hand, quite severely while trying to prepare something. For herself she was in great agony. But when she tried phoning Laura she did not answer. Just a child. Emily had to go to the closest hospital with her hand covered in a towel. Alone. Terrified in pain. She waited hours in the ER before a nurse at last spotted her and attended to her. Emily showed me the scar on her palm. A continual reminder of her mother's negligence. Still worse was the second episode. Laura had been on a drinking frenzy for weeks. She was 15. Emily made every effort to avoid her mother. Until one evening Laura became aggressive. In a flash of wrath, she flung a glass at Emily that broke against her leg severely. Emily was in shock and bleeding. Instead of tending to her, Laura yelled at her to tidy the mess. Terrified, Emily covered her leg in an old shirt and headed once more toward the hospital. She wound up needing sutures there. I had a range of emotions as Emily related these tales. Sorrow for all the suffering Emily had gone through. Infuriate Laura for sending our daughter through this dream. It was not something I had felt in years. She was young and not deserving of any of this. She did not deserve to be left terrified, injured and alone. The one person, meant to be defending her, ought not to treat her like a burden. This was unmistakable. Physical and psychological assault. It seemed ironic that Laura's daily routines included the very thing she had accused me of, dragging Emily away from. Laura should have simply let me look after Emily to prevent all of this. Emily may have had a normal, contented life if she hadn't been so enthralled with her own selfishness. In spite, the entire evening Megan and I listened to Emily. We checked to see she felt at ease and understood she was safe now. Megan specifically consoled Emily by holding her hand and telling her none of this was her fault. Having someone console Emily, tell her she was loved and that she mattered, seemed so important to her. Then Emily apologized to me, in a moment that was both sad and contradictory. She had nothing to repent of, hence she didn't need to. But she did. She admitted she pushed me away. She was sorry for believing all the lies her mother had taught her, and she should have seen the reality sooner. Her voice faltered as she informed me she had missed me so much over these years and had frequently wondered what life would have been like if she had lived with me. Instead I told her how much I had missed her too, how I had never stopped thinking about her, how I had never stopped loving her, and that she did not need to apologize for anything, as Laura's games merely served as a victim stage. That was a mixed feeling. Hearing her apologies hurt, but it also meant that we were at last re-establishing our relationship. Following all these years apart, I also came to see that I was done running from family strife and playing it safe, though it meant facing legal conflict with my ex-wife. My daughter's well-being was at risk, and I was determined to receive the apology and reparation she deserved. After a restless night of consoling and chatting, Emily and I hatched a strategy. Early the next morning, we were going to face my family about everything. Every lie, every act of neglect, everything Emily had gone through. I was done with them, acting as though they were the ideal family. While Laura had helped Emily to ruin her early years, the medical records, text messages, and even some old Laura voicemails, Emily had provided the evidence we needed. It was time to tell them just exactly what their complicity had cost. It was time to reveal the truth. Emily seemed anxious, but I could also detect a resolution in her eyes not previously seen. I was going to be right there beside her. She was ready to meet them and defend herself. Last, we would be getting the justice we both deserved. Update 2. Emily and I had scheduled. Well, it happened and it was most certainly memorable. I agreed to pay a surprise visit together with my daughter. I saw the amazement on their faces as soon as we entered the door. They seemed unable to really handle seeing us together, united after all these years. They had never imagined that the years of isolation, manipulation and deceit could be quickly reversed. Here we were nevertheless, poised side by side ready to face them. The first shock passed swiftly, and they hurried to present their customary worried front. The first person to talk was my mother, whose voice was tinged with phony anxiety as she asked Emily whether I had offended her or harmed her. The implication stung, not because I cared what others thought of Laura, but rather because it demonstrated how firmly they had embraced her story. Though it was a horrible idea, one they appeared to hold without doubt, was that I would hurt my own daughter. Perhaps because it would help them to defend their own behavior, they were fast to accept the worst of me. But Emily was no more the terrified, bewildered child Laura knew, and I was not Laura. Emily stepped forward before I could answer. Her voice was firm, full of a quiet strength that made me proud. She urged them to abandon the act, to stop acting as though they cared, when throughout the years, they had done nothing to support her. Her statements were neither wavering or hesitant. She called them out for their indifference, for standing by while Laura ignored and mistreated her, and for helping to bring about the ruin of her early years. I observed as my siblings and parents struggled to hide their uneasiness. Their looks changed from pretended concern to something more like irritation. They disliked being challenged, particularly not by Emily, who they still considered as a child, someone who ought to be appreciative of whatever sloppiness of attention they had given her. But Emily was no child anymore, and she showed no interest in their empty apologies or explanations. Some of you have inquired how Laura simply set my own family against me. Our relationship has always been complex, underlying animosity and years of unresolved problems entangling it. My siblings and I had never been close. There was always a sense of one-upmanship, of competitiveness, that corroded any possibility of a real bond. Rather than encouraging harmony, my parents had sided with whichever child would have the greatest benefit for them. At the time, Laura came to them intending to divorce me, and they saw it as a chance to vent their residual animosity at me. They had not given Emily or me any thought about how it would affect us. Their interests were more in seeing me push down a peg than in clearing past records. Emily gave out everything that had happened, how Laura had deserted her, how she had experienced trauma and injuries while they turned a blind eye, and I could see the anxiety rising on their faces, particularly not by someone they had undervalued for so long. They were not used to being questioned in this manner. It was not only the words that stung. It was Emily's holding of them responsible, refusing to let their typical platitudes absolve them. Of course, we withheld some of what we had. Showing all of our cards at once was not necessary. We had text messages, hospital records, and other data readily able to undermine their well-crafted story. For now, though, we kept most of it under wraps, simply showing enough to make it abundantly evident we were serious. This was a warning, a proclamation that we were done following their guidelines, and that things were going to get far more serious. Not only some emotional outburst. We fled the house not waiting for any reply. Nothing they could say would make any difference. Nothing that would undo the years of suffering and neglect they had let to occur. Emily said one last farewell as we turned away. She advised them to forward it to Laura, therefore alerting her that we were arriving with a somewhat heavy case, and she should be ready for it. Update 3. I got in touch with one of our lawyers right away following the event at my family's house. Not just to me but also to Emily. I was not ready to let Laura get away with all she had done. Emily startled me. Nevertheless, when I mentioned considering legal action, she wanted no more legalities moving ahead. Far from contrary. It was not that she lacked empathy or that she was forgiving her mother. Emily had different responsibilities now, and had lately gone through a lot. She had great ideas for her future, and her academic life was vibrant. She could not afford to pause to sue her mother and handle a court dispute. As her dad, I was really proud of her. She was still a brilliant, tenacious young woman with enormous professional possibilities ahead of her. After all she had gone through, I did, however, also find myself torn. Part of me wanted Laura to suffer for her deeds, to pay for the suffering she had brought about. One thing I did wrong was ruin my life. Nevertheless, I found unforgivable damage done to Emily, that of robbing her of a normal, happy childhood. I did, however, honor Emily's desires. Unlike her mother's, her view counted here, and it was something I would constantly keep in mind while deciding what to do. Another thing occurred when we were negotiating all of this. 2 days later, Laura's neighbor walked up to our door bearing an envelope. The neighbor said Laura had asked her to bring the mail to us as she was temporarily leaving town, though I had no idea what to expect. I accepted the envelope and thanked the neighbor. Within the envelope, Laura had a note, long and full of apologies and explanations. It sought to defend her behavior. She talked about losing her job, how she grew quite alone when I left, and how events descended from there. She finally landed another job, but it paid little, and she descended into more misery. Drinking became her coping mechanism. She said she never intended to hurt Emily, that she was simply so lost and overwhelmed by her own suffering. Laura continued to go into great detail about more of her challenges, seeking to depict a lady driven to the brink by events beyond her reach. But reading made me focus only on how hollow everything sounded. Laura was obviously trying to justify her actions and project an impression of victimization from her own experiences, but no degree of difficulty could excuse her treatment of Emily. She begged us not to go to legal war. At the end of the letter, as a show of kindness, she pledged to avoid Emily. Also offered to pay whatever we felt was appropriate. as reparations for the damage she had done. Emily's eyes showed grief as soon as I turned over the letter to her. She had not sought this apology, and it most definitely was not the resolution she was due. What kind of mother leaves her child like this, and subsequently believes that money could possibly offset all the years of suffering and neglect? For Emily it was a terrible insight. I knew she needed time to get through it. Emily needed space, as she would reach out to Megan or me when she was ready. For Emily, someone she could confide in without judgment. My wife Megan had become fast a comfort. Soon Emily became like family to all of us, developing a close relationship with Megan's kids. Although I wanted to assist, I knew Emily would gain more for Megan's support and viewpoint, to help her to organize everything. Eventually Emily came to me with her choice. She refused to go after a legal lawsuit. She wanted not to drag things out anymore or become mired in a nasty court struggle. Freed from the shadows of the past, she wanted to start anew and concentrate on her and her future. Emily was ready to go on, and I knew this was the right decision, even if I wanted justice for her. She had lived under the weight of her mother's errors for sufficient time. She was ready to live her life on her terms. Emily's choice sent us into a fresh chapter. She began concentrating more on her academics, directing her efforts toward her objectives and dreams. As Megan negotiated this new stage of her life, Megan and I kept helping her in all possible respects, providing direction and encouragement. Regarding myself, this seems like a dream. Things cannot have concluded on a better note. I have 3 children and an incredible wife at my side. Though the trip had been protracted and agonizing, at last we had returned to one another. More than all, that was the real success in all of this.